Assistant Professor of History, Melinda Centers. You're joining us here in the Thomas D. Clark Reading Room of the Katie Murrell Library for Lindsey Wilson Conversations. And the way this works is you get to enjoy your beverage of choice, which is the pride of South Central Kentucky, a ski. And while you enjoy your ski, we get to talk about something that interests you. And because you are a professor of history, we're going to talk about history, specifically U.S. history in the age of Jackson. You're teaching this semester at Lindsey Wilson College a course on the age of Jackson. Talk a little bit about Andrew Jackson and his significance and the role he plays as the seventh president of the United States.
Okay. Well, Jackson, although he's going to have a varied career, he's going to make his mark as a military man, the hero of the War of 1812. And he's really going to come to symbolize many of the changes that the country was going. I mean, you've got a young country that's growing and maturing and getting stronger, and Andrew Jackson just seemed to epitomize that age, hence the term. It's an arbitrary designation, but his strong personality seemed to sort of tower over this period in American history.
He first ran for president in 1824. Did not win in 1824. What happened then?
1824, known as the corrupt bargain. At this time, it was a contest between Jackson, of course, the military hero, John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, and William H. Crawford. Well, Jackson wins the majority, or he wins the popular vote, but not a majority of the electoral votes. So according to the Constitution at this time, this puts the race into the House of Representatives, and it restricts it to the top three candidates, which happen to be Jackson, Adams, and Crawford. Well, Clay is out of the running, but he is Speaker of the House of Representatives. So he uses his influence as Speaker and throws his support behind Adams, and despite the fact that overwhelmingly Kentucky had voted for Jackson. Okay? So because of his support in swinging Kentucky's electoral votes to Jackson, John Quincy Adams wins, but subsequently Adams names Henry Clay as Secretary of State. At that time, Secretary of State was seen as the stepping stone to the presidency, so it looked like a bargain had been struck between the two, and Jackson's supporters cried foul. So it's interesting, and I make the connection with my students that in some ways you can see parallels between the 1824 election and that of 2000, where Gore won the majority or won the popular vote, and then ultimately was decided in the Supreme Court, and some feel as though the election was taken away from Gore and given to George W. Bush. I guess that depends on which side of the aisle that you are, but some would feel that way. So you can make some connections between the two.
Okay, and then 4 years later, Jackson returns. He wins the election of 1828, but it wasn't exactly the smoothest of presidencies.
Right. Well, his supporters begin, the Tennessee legislature nominates him the very next year, 1825, and his supporters start campaigning right from the beginning. And so he is going to win an overwhelming victory in 1828, but definitely not the smoothest of presidencies. I mean, there were a lot of issues coming down at this time, some due to just the growth of the United States as it matured. One of his missions, one of his greatest enemies, was the Bank of the United States. He was determined to kill the monster, as it was known. He also decided that he was going to be the one to settle the so-called Indian question that had been around for decades. And so we have ultimately Indian removal. Trail of Tears will happen during the presidency of Van Buren, but it will ultimately lead to that. And meanwhile, you have South Carolina threatening secession in the 1830s within the nullification crisis. So definitely a dynamic time period.
What do we refer to when we call it the age of Jackson? What does that mean?
That's a great question because it refers not just to his presidency, but roughly between 1815, the treaty which ended the War of 1812, and then the Mexican-American War. really, in sort of a bigger picture, Jackson seemed to epitomize larger changes within the country and within the government. We really see the transition of the country becoming essentially a republic to a democracy. Okay? The founding fathers definitely believed that power should be in the hands of an elite few, and the elites dominated from Washington to John Quincy Adams. But Andrew Jackson was everything they were not. He had very humble beginnings, not an elite family, not an elite background, and so with his presidency and other changes that were taking place, it's again the country becoming from a republic to a democracy. More people voting. This franchise was extended to all adult white males, and more people participating. Suddenly, I mean, people said that if Andrew Jackson could be president, then I can be president. He was known as a hero of the common man, and he was quite appealing because of that. He was inspiring because of that.
You mentioned Henry Clay from Kentucky, always a bridesmaid, never a bride.
Exactly how I describe it in the classroom, definitely.
Why didn't Henry Clay ever become president of the United States? He once said he'd rather be right than be president.
Ultimately, the corrupt bargain. I think that it all goes back to the 1824 election. I mean, Henry Clay was, he was likable, he was charismatic, he was a great orator, negotiator, politician for the most part. People tended to like him, but they didn't trust him. And even though there's no evidence that there was a bargain between Adams and Clay, it appeared as though there were. And perception, as they say, is reality. And so he wasn't trusted after that and continually wanted the presidency. And the argument could be made that he had even more influence on this period than Jackson, because it was really many of his ideas and his agenda that defined his presidency. I mean, Jackson was reacting to many of his ideas, but even though he would run again for a different party in the new Whig Party, would never be successful. And I think it goes back to the corrupt bargain. Even if he had given Kentucky electoral votes to Adams, okay, I don't think it was that in itself did it. He accepted the position of Secretary of State, and I think ultimately that was what did it for him.
Assistant Professor of History Melinda Centers, thank you for joining us for Lindsey Wilson Conversations.
Thank you, and thank you for the ski.